Tischer with TCI Business Capital. One of our strategic initiatives is to serve as a resource for staffing owners. We want to help you grow not only with our funding, but with our staffing expertise, our partnerships, and our connections within the industry. Therefore, I've invited Alan Lafke from Universal Background Screening to spend a few minutes talking with me today. Adverse action itself isn't new, but it seems like we're starting to see some new requirements, and I'm particularly thinking about Illinois. And so therefore, we thought it would be a good topic for us to discuss today.
Absolutely. And yeah, this is what I would consider the third form. So we talked about two forms just in the previous part, but this is, again, one of the most important areas to make sure to be done correctly. A lot of organizations, especially if they're smaller firms, don't really understand this. And there's a little buffer with staffing firms, and we'll talk about that in a moment, with adverse action. And we'll get more into that after just kind of discussing the basics of it. Again, going back to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, as I mentioned about the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the last comment, which is providing a dispute mechanism for consumers, is really talking about adverse action, as you see in the highlight here. So when we're talking about adverse action, it's when you're looking at any report and that report on that candidate influences you in any way. It doesn't matter if it's a verification, a motor vehicle report, whatever it may be on that report, that influences you negative to potentially not hire that candidate, you are required to give that candidate the right to dispute that information for false positive information. And it does happen. The courts, the U.S. system court system knows that there is information that may be incorrect even in the courts, and also with just the identifiers we need, which is why they have set this up into allowing candidates or consumers to dispute that information. So you always want to give the opportunity to the candidate to dispute if you're potentially not going to hire them. There are certain organizations that just don't hire them and they don't know this process, and they can end up in a class action if the candidate is savvy. So there's 4 easy steps. And so we always like going over these steps, especially with our clients. We go over these. And again, you can always print this off when you get a copy of this, which is number one, let's just take a candidate. You're not going to potentially hire them based on some egregious information on the report. So you'd want to notify the consumer that you may be taking adverse action. Your background screening firm should have sample forms for this. And it's just a pre-adverse action letter. You send that along with a copy of the report, number 2, and number 3, that summary of rights document that we talked about, that form that the government has, and you can download it on the website or through your background screening firm. Then the next step is crucial. You have to wait a reasonable amount of time to then make the final decision. And that reasonable amount of time can be anywhere between 5 and 10 business days. If it's less than 5, you can be sued for it. And 5 is the limit. We're seeing more and more laws about something that we'll talk about in a little bit about ban the box, where laws are now changed in ban the box laws to include adverse action to wait 5 business days to mail and for the candidate to receive a copy, and 5 days for them to dispute, which means 10 days. So there's certain municipalities that are already requiring that. So you may want to take a look at your policy of how many days you're waiting. And in addition, as Sherry mentioned, there are new laws sprouting up, and the newest one this year in March was that Illinois made an additional form for adverse action that has to be sent to the candidate to specifically and personally list why you would not potentially hire that person and what's on the report specifically and why. So that would be an additional form that would be sent out if you're in Illinois or if the candidate's in Illinois. So there's a link on here, but you can look it up online too, which is really important to talk that through because, again, in Illinois, they have that new law that's into effect now. If the candidate, after that reasonable amount of time, does not get back to the background screening firm or you, then you can send out a final adverse action notice, which should, again, be provided to you as a sample form by your background screening firm, another copy of the report, and another summary of rights document. Now, if you're in Illinois, there's going to be another form, also a 4th form, just in Illinois, that also personalizes and lets them know they're not going to be hired. And then you can rescind the offer. Now, you'll be protected based on all the case law out there if you follow these steps. If not, it ends up in class action. Now, if there is a dispute, just know that the background screening firm is required to review the dispute, to contact both you and the candidate and keep you updated on what's going on, and to resolve the dispute within a 30-day window. Now, of course, that's 30 days is a long time for a requisition to stay open. Most background screening firms finish them in about 5 business days. So it's pretty quick after the resolution starts because everyone knows how fast you need that back so you can make that hire for your client. And reports should be updated with communication about where the background screening company is in that process of getting that resolved. Now, it's a staffing firm, as I mentioned at the beginning, there's a little more cushion in the sense that maybe you're not going to hire them for one position, but you can hire them for a different job if you have candidates. And so they're not really quote unquote fired. They can still be part of the group, and maybe you're going to be having them work at a different with a different organization. But it is important to know that best practice is to go through the adverse action process. If you have a better qualified candidate and it has nothing to do with a report, you don't have to follow this process. But again, it's always important to talk to legal about this.
And I have a question, Alan. So, with Illinois, sort of, I guess, taking the lead on this particular additional requirement, 2 questions. Is
Sure.
that where the employee is living?
It is where the employee's living, but also it's important if your organization resides in that state. So the best practice is where organization resides and where the candidate resides at the time of hire. Because
Okay,
then you're covered, because if it ever goes to court, that's what the other side's going to bring up, is one
right.
of those two or both. So that's just most conservative best practices to do it that way.
And then second question is just based on your experience with, new requirements like this from various states, how likely is it that other states will roll out the same or a similar requirement?
Very good question. So, doing this for 20 years and, for the last, for the first 10 years of the 20 years, I haven't seen that many law changes. For the last 5 years, law changes have happened very quickly. And what we find, just like with Ban the Box, which we'll talk about, laws, as soon as they start building in states and municipalities, usually end up as a federal law. So I'm pretty sure we're going to see some other states join forces on this and also have similar laws. We've seen that with employment credit. We've seen that with Ban the Box. We've seen that with salary restrictions. So I'm sure we're going to see that also with adverse action too, with these types of extra forms.